Welcome to the Papyrus Global Television Africa News Update. Here are today's headlines. Fuel crisis hits multiple African countries amid Middle East tensions. Dangote Refinery emerges as Africa's fuel powerhouse, boosts regional supply. Africa's debt crisis deepens as 90 billion repayment burden pressures economies. UK aid cuts trigger backlash across Africa over healthcare and development concerns. South Africa's top police chief charged in major corruption scandal. UN General Assembly passes landmark resolution declaring transatlantic slave trade gravest crime against humanity. Chad-Sudan border security tensions raise regional concerns in the Sahel. Freedom of expression under threat in West Africa amid rising attacks on journalists. Zimbabwe warns citizens exploited into Russia-Ukraine war. Rising extremist violence in the Sahel sparks regional security alarm. Another news update. Across Africa, a severe fuel crisis is intensifying in March 2026, affecting countries including Nigeria, South Africa, Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, and Mauritius. Supply disruptions have been linked to geopolitical instability in the Middle East, particularly tensions around the Strait of Hormuz, a key global oil transit route. Governments report acute shortages of petrol, diesel, and kerosene, causing long queues at petrol stations, rising transportation costs, and operational disruptions in key industries. In Nigeria, the Petroleum Products Marketing Company (PPMC) confirmed that refinery output struggles, compounded by logistic bottlenecks, have left several states with intermittent fuel supply. In Kenya, the Kenya Pipeline Company reported delays in imports from the Middle East, forcing rationing in Nairobi, Mombasa, and Kisumu. Transport unions in Uganda and Tanzania announced planned strikes over escalating fuel prices, which threatened the cost of goods and public transport fares. Analysts warn that without immediate intervention, widespread economic and social disruptions are likely, with ripple effects on inflation and cost of living across urban and rural communities. Nigeria's Dangote Refinery in Lagos is emerging as a strategic hub for Africa's fuel supply, providing a potential lifeline amid the regional energy crisis. The refinery, with a production capacity of 650,000 barrels per day, is now supplying petrol, diesel, and aviation fuel domestically and exporting to neighboring countries including Ghana, Togo, and South Africa. Negotiations are underway to expand deliveries to Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania. According to spokesperson Alhaji Abdulhamid Balogun, the refinery has increased storage and logistics capacity, enabling it to stabilize regional supply chains. Economists highlight that Dangote's operations could reduce Africa's dependence on imported refined petroleum products, which currently cost billions of dollars annually. Experts also emphasize that this milestone aligns with Nigeria's strategic vision for energy independence and regional trade leadership, though challenges remain, including distribution inefficiencies, port congestion, and foreign exchange volatility. African nations are facing mounting debt pressure in 2026 with over 90 billion in scheduled payments, threatening economic stability. Countries such as Ghana, Zambia, Kenya, Nigeria, and Sudan are undergoing fiscal strain due to declining commodity revenues, inflation, currency depreciation, and rising global interest rates. Analysts at the Africa Development Bank warn that without coordinated debt restructuring and structural reforms, the repayment burden could compromise social programs, infrastructure development, and poverty alleviation efforts. In Ghana, government officials are negotiating with bilateral and multilateral lenders to refinance obligations totaling $12 billion. Kenya faces a similar crisis, with the World Bank warning of potential macroeconomic shocks. Experts urge African nations to implement fiscal discipline, diversify revenue streams beyond commodity exports, and pursue strategic partnerships to access concessional financing. Failure to act may risk economic contraction, higher unemployment, and social unrest in multiple regions. The United Kingdom announced €4 billion reduction in foreign aid for 2026 has sparked widespread concerns across Africa. The cut affects critical programs in healthcare, education, agriculture, and development. Nigerian, Kenyan, and South African government officials, alongside NGOs and civil society organizations, have criticized the decision, warning that it could undermine progress in vaccination campaigns, HIV/AIDS programs, maternal health initiatives, and education for marginalized communities. The British government cited domestic budgetary constraints and shifting priorities, but African development experts argue that reducing aid at this juncture may reverse gains achieved over the past decade. In Kenya, the Ministry of Health warned that the cuts could affect over 300,000 children in rural vaccination programs. Similarly, in Nigeria, civil society groups are calling for stronger domestic investments to offset the shortfall, while advocating for international donor engagement to fill the gap. National Police Commissioner Fanny Masemola has been formally charged in March 2026 with multiple counts of corruption related to healthcare procurement contracts for police personnel. The charges include fraud, abuse of office, and money laundering, reportedly involving contracts worth over 1.2 billion rand. The Pretoria High Court confirmed that the case would proceed, with hearings scheduled throughout the coming months. Analysts note that the trial could have major implications for law enforcement governance in South Africa, where public trust in police institutions has been strained due to ongoing allegations of corruption. Civil society organizations and oversight bodies are calling for transparency and accountability, stressing the importance of judicial independence in high-profile cases. On March 24, 2026, the United Nations General Assembly passed a historic resolution designating the transatlantic slave trade as the gravest crime against humanity. Sponsored by African nations and supported by the Africa Union, the resolution underscores the global recognition of the historical injustices suffered by millions of Africans over centuries. The resolution calls for educational initiatives, commemorative campaigns, and reparative measures to acknowledge the historical impact of slavery on African communities. In a statement, African Union Chairperson Musa Faki Mohammed praised the decision as a milestone for historical justice and moral accountability. Member states are now expected to integrate the resolution into national curricula, museums, and cultural heritage programs, emphasizing remembrance and reconciliation. We will now take a short break and then we will continue when we come back.
Paglogma 2026. The Papyrus Global launches new series starting Tuesday, 3rd March 2026. The conversation starts now across Africa. Our languages may differ, our borders may separate us, but our struggles bear semblance. Communities seeking opportunities, youth demanding inclusion, citizens calling for transparency. These are realities that unite us. Africa is united by a common challenge and a common responsibility, building resilient, inclusive, and sustainable communities. To set this conversation in motion, the Papyrus Global is launching the pre-conference live series, Governance That Touches Lives. Let's start where it matters the most.
Welcome back, and now the news will continue. Clashes along the Chad-Sudan border in March 2026 have displaced thousands of civilians and raised concerns over escalating regional instability. Reports indicate that armed groups, including cross-border militias, are engaging in sporadic attacks on villages and humanitarian convoys. Governments in both countries have deployed additional security forces, but international observers stress that sustained diplomatic engagement and confidence-building measures are essential to prevent escalation. The Africa Union and United Nations have urged both governments to ensure humanitarian access, provide protection for internally displaced persons, and strengthen border monitoring mechanisms. Analysts warn that unresolved tensions could destabilize the broader Sahel region, impacting neighboring countries such as Central African Republic, Libya, and Niger. Journalists in Nigeria, Ghana, and Senegal continue to face threats, harassment, and arrests while reporting on sensitive political issues, ethnic tensions, and corruption scandals. In Nigeria, several reporters covering local elections were detained for allegedly publishing false information, while in Ghana, media outlets have faced police intimidation during coverage of controversial government projects. Civil society organizations and regional bodies such as ECOWAS have condemned these actions, emphasizing the importance of press freedom in democratic governance. Advocacy groups are calling for legislative reforms, protection protocols, and international monitoring to safeguard journalists and media institutions. The ongoing environment raises concerns about the shrinking space for civic engagement and free expression in the region. The Zimbabwean government confirmed in March 2026 that 15 citizens have died after being deceived into joining the Russia-Ukraine conflict, recruited by fraudulent agencies promising overseas employment. Several dozens remain trapped in conflict zones, with authorities working to coordinate their safe return. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs, in collaboration with Zimbabwe's consulates and the African Union, is issuing public advisories against foreign recruitment scams. Similar reports have emerged in Kenya, Nigeria, and South Africa, prompting diplomatic discussions on transnational recruitment fraud and citizen protection. The cases have drawn attention to global human trafficking networks exploiting economic vulnerabilities across Africa. Violent extremist activity continued to escalate across Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, and Chad, raising alarms over regional stability. Attacks on civilian populations, government facilities, and humanitarian convoys have increased, leading to fatalities, displacement, and economic disruptions. Analysts point to weakening counterterrorism networks, limited governance in rural areas, and porous borders as key drivers of insecurity. The African Union, ECOWAS, and European partners are coordinating military, intelligence, and development interventions, but experts warn that long-term stability requires addressing socio-economic grievances, strengthening local governance, and expanding education and employment opportunities to prevent radicalization. And that brings us to the end of the news on the Papyrus Global Television. But before we go, a recap of our headlines. Fuel crisis hits multiple African countries amid Middle East tensions. Dangote Refinery emerges as Africa's fuel powerhouse, boosts regional supply. Africa's debt crisis deepens as $90 billion repayment burden precious economies. UK aid cuts trigger backlash across Africa over healthcare and development concerns. South Africa's top police chief charged in major corruption scandal. UN General Assembly passes landmark resolution declaring transatlantic slave trade gravest crime against humanity. Chad-Sudan border security tensions raise regional concerns in the Sahel. Freedom of expression under threat in West Africa amid rising attacks on journalists. Zimbabwe warns citizens exploited into Russia-Ukraine war. Rising extremist violence in the Sahel sparks regional security alarm. For continuous coverage, expert analysis, and live updates, stay connected with the Papyrus Global Television. Visit papyrusdaily.com for breaking news. I am your host, Christiana Barbayo. Thanks for joining us. Stay safe and informed.